Next on KQED Newsroom, State Senate President Pro Tem Darrell Steinberg talks about what he learned on his trip to Central America to meet with leaders on immigration and other issues. And as the president weighs in on the tens of thousands of children crossing the U.S. border, what does it mean for Bay Area schools, service providers, and the courts? Also, a look at Governor Brown's recent judicial appointees and how they're changing the face of the court system. I'm here at the California Academy of Sciences, where researchers recently returned from an expedition to a place they call the Twilight Zone. Coming up, we'll take you on a behind-the-scenes tour of their incredible discoveries. Good evening and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. As the country grapples with tens of thousands of children crossing the U.S. border from Central America, many of these youths make their way to the Bay Area. Today, President Obama met with the presidents of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador to discuss what many are calling a humanitarian crisis. Since October, nearly 60,000 unaccompanied minors from that region have entered the U.S. Some are seeking refuge from violence and poverty. We'll have analysis in a moment, but first, Scott Shafer spoke earlier with State Senate President Pro Tem Darrell Steinberg. He led a delegation of lawmakers to Central America and just returned this week.
Senator Steinberg, good to have you with us. Welcome.
Good to be with you, Scott.
You spent about 9 days in Central America with some of your colleagues. What did you learn that you didn't already know?
Well, I think I learned a great deal, but mostly reinforced what I already believed, which is that there are really two issues here. One is, how do we help the kids who have made this perilous journey, who are seeking asylum because of gangs and risks of violence? How do we make sure that we protect those children? That's one. But number two, the trip reinforced my belief that the long-term solution to this crisis is to address the underlying economic and security conditions within these countries, because unless and until we prudently invest in improving the education systems and the economies of El Salvador especially, but El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, this is going to continue because kids and their parents are making this journey in the end for one reason. They want a better life. And unless we address that, I fear that it is going to continue over the long term.
And yet many people may hear that and think, well, we have plenty of education problems here in California. We have failing schools. We have millions of children and families living in poverty. What are the limits of our generosity?
Well, there are limits, but let me give you an example where we are being generous, but maybe we ought to think of it as a bit of a down payment or a model. When we were in El Salvador, the United States had offered the Salvadoran government almost $300 million of aid through what they call a Millennium Challenge grant to help improve education for El Salvadoran youngsters, specifically more vocational education opportunities, in addition to economic development for infrastructure and other high-wage job opportunities. The El Salvadoran government said that they wanted the money, but the United States insisted that El Salvador also pass an anti-money laundering law. There was a lot of back and forth on that, and our delegation reinforced with the Salvadoran government, including the president of the parliament, that they must find a way to get that money, because they had to. If we were offering to help them improve their country, they had to find a way to take it.
Closer to home, though, the Attorney General Kamala Harris is trying to get pro bono attorneys from big law firms to go down to the border and act as immigration attorneys for these kids, presumably to help them get asylum. Do you think that, quite apart from what's happening and what's being done in those other countries, should we be helping these kids to stay here in our state?
Well, I believe we should, and in fact, a couple of my lead staff attorneys are going to volunteer and represent some of these kids. Look, my view is that a kid is a kid is a kid, regardless of their immigration status, and it's easy to politicize the plight of children. But think for a moment about what it takes for a parent and or a child to decide to make this journey, this dangerous journey on top of trains, hiring these coyotes in order to come to this country. They must be pretty desperate, and they must want a better life. And I think we have a long history of immigration. We're all immigrants. People came through Ellis Island. My ancestors came through Ellis Island. This is a different way, and certainly we need federal immigration reforming. There needs to be some controls, and each of these cases need to be decided on their merits. But I would err on the side of granting relief to kids who are trying to flee these violent environments where they don't have much opportunity.
All right, State Senator Darrell Steinberg, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Scott.
And joining me now to discuss this issue further are San Francisco immigration judge Dana Marks, president of the National Association of Immigration Judges, Deborah Saunders, San Francisco Chronicle conservative columnist, and Ian Gordon, Mother Jones editor. And Ian, we just heard from Darrell Steinberg, but today President Obama also told the leaders of the 3 Central American countries that most of the children crossing the border will not be allowed to stay. Do you think that that message is likely to stem the tide of unaccompanied minors?
No, I don't. I mean, I think that the Obama administration is trying to do what it can. I mean, I think by putting ads, for example, on television in Central America, by even producing music to play on the radios that are kind of anti-migration, have an anti-migration message. But I think, these tactics just really don't work. I mean, if we're really thinking about this as a humanitarian issue, kids aren't going to be dissuaded by that, and families aren't going to be dissuaded by that either.
Deborah, is it a humanitarian issue? Are the children actually fleeing violence and crime and poverty, or are they here for family reunification?
I think both. I mean, we know that there are a number of children who are afraid they're going to be killed if they stay in their homes, and they're coming here for refuge, and that's something that this country ought to do and must do. But we also know the ambassador to the U.S. from El Salvador said that basically part of what we're seeing is upward mobility of immigrants who finally have enough money to send for their kids. And we know that a lot of kids are coming over to be with their family. It's that I understand why they want to do it, but it's economic. It's not just fleeing violence. So you've got 2 things going on. You've got horrible crime and kids who are running off, but then there are also people who basically, it's interesting. The president says, don't come here, you won't be allowed to stay, but you will. Because kids are going to come across the border, they're unaccompanied minors, they're going to talk to someone from the Border Patrol. If they have family, they'll be sent to be near their family. They'll have a permiso, they'll be told that they are supposed to come to court. They know that that court date will be a long time. What's the average wait, 580 days?
It depends on where you are in the United States. That's correct.
It's a long time. So if the president can say don't come, you can't stay, but what kids are saying and what families are seeing is, yeah, you can stay for a long time.
So, Judge Marks, why does it take so long? Your organization has issued a position paper on this, and the average number of days for a pending case before reaching a decision is 578 days.
For years, the National Association of Immigration Judges has been the canary in the coal mine saying you can't have immigration enforcement without giving money to the courts because we are a part of it. In the last decade or so, I think we've gotten something like 2% of the money that goes to immigration enforcement. What concerns me here is that the immigration courts are the faces of American justice that these foreign-born individuals see, and often the only face of the United States government that they're going to see. If we are trying to promote America as an example to the world, we need to walk the walk. We should not be cutting rights to people at a time that it is inconvenient to us. The time is instead, or what the times call for, is that we should reinforce our legal structures by giving adequate resources to the judges to let them do their jobs and to let them do it in a reasonable amount of time. sufficient time for children to be able to get advocates to help represent them or adults to speak on their behalf, and to hear the circumstances of their cases and decide, not in the press, but in the courts, whether or not they have claims for asylum.
So explain to us the process. What are the criteria they have to meet to be granted asylum in this country?
Asylum is not a straightforward piece of law to explain. You have to show either past persecution or a well-founded fear of future persecution. It has to be by the government or a group that the government cannot control, but it also has to be tied on one of 5 statutory grounds. And 4 of those grounds are pretty straightforward and easy to understand. That's race, religion, nationality, or political opinion. But the 5th ground is membership in a particular social group. And that is a traditional ground in international law, but the way American law works is we decide what that term means by case adjudication. And the outer margins of what that means for victims of gang violence are still being developed in the courts. And there's only so fast any of us can go without causing these cases to become a logjam of appeals that will end up being counterproductive for those who want quick enforcement. It has to be a balance between efficiency and fairness.
I have a question. A child today an unaccompanied minor who comes across the border is sent to San Francisco. That child will have a date to see you. What are the chances of that child showing up?
The statistics vary on that, and we frankly don't have good statistics. We do know that the chances of them appearing are heightened tremendously when they have legal counsel, because there are a lot of issues with regard to whether notification is proper to these children, because 3 government agencies are involved. They have to deal with the Office of Refugee Resettlement, who helps place them with individuals. They have to deal with the Department of Homeland Security, who places them in proceedings.
Are half likely to show up?
And they have to deal with the court for their final court date.
But let me ask you this, because all of this is swirling, and meanwhile these kids have to go somewhere, and we're seeing them in the Bay Area, we're seeing them in San Francisco, we're seeing them in Oakland. Ian, you've been covering this. What is happening to them when they get here?
Well, and if I may just for a minute, I'm sorry, I don't mean to steal your time, but the administration has shifted the priorities, and these children are now being brought into court within 21 days.
Okay, so now you can answer
and what
the
are the
question,
chances
Ian.
of them showing?
Well, part of that, and there are some stats on that, and 70% of kids show up for their first hearing, and then it goes down from there. But many kids, particularly as Judge Mark said, many kids who have counsel are showing up and continue to show up for their many hearings. In terms of what's happening to kids who get here, I was just talking to the principal of Oakland International High School, Carmelita Reyes, and she was telling me that 140 kids just in Oakland have arrived in the last 6 months or so. So those kids are going to be going into the school system. Oakland International only has space for 400 kids, so 140 kids obviously aren't going to be going there. So they're going to get absorbed into the public school system, and a lot of these kids are coming with trauma, varying levels of education. Some of them have never been to school. Some of the students that I met at San Francisco International High School had gone to school for a year or 2 years, and now they're in high school in San Francisco. So there are a wide range of kids who are coming, and they have a wide range of needs. And I think that's something that we need to be talking about more as this goes on through the summer and into the fall. So
are there special services or programs being put in place to deal with that?
I think that there are some schools, like the international schools that I mentioned, that have the ability to deal with some of these kids, but they're not big schools. So what's happening at the bigger schools and what's happening to kids who aren't getting that services is still a question.
So Judge Marks, obviously from what you've been telling us is that you're understaffed. There's a huge backlog of cases, nearly 400,000 according to your group. What do you want to see happen at this point?
We believe that the size of the immigration judge corps should basically be doubled. And it would be ideal for cases to be heard, say, within an 8-month to 12-month window in general. Sufficient time for people to get their resources together, to find an attorney, to get the documentation and witnesses that they need to present their case, and then to be able to present it within that time frame. But the way you need to do that is to hire more immigration judges, because there simply is not space on the docket for us to do that work.
So that's a long-term approach. In the meantime, we still have this surge happening. It doesn't seem to be dying down. Deborah, what what do we do about it? I mean, we've got them coming in. What do you want to see done?
Well, obviously, we have to take care of children who come across the border. There's no question about it. And it's the pictures that you showed, those kids on La Bestia, it's heartbreaking. I mean, so we look at Washington, and we're waiting for Washington to do something. And I really do not know what we're going to see happen. On the one hand, President Obama has talked about changing the 2008 law that basically is part of the reason we have the system, the law passed by Congress and signed by President Bush. But now Democrats are saying that they don't want to change it. Republicans are saying that they want to change in that. They want to be able to deport children back to Guatemala and Honduras and El Salvador more quickly. I don't know what's going to happen.
And in the meantime, Congress is due to go on its summer break late next week. So who knows what's going to happen. Thank you. I'm going to have to stop you there because we are out of time. But I know you're very passionate about this. Deborah Saunders with the San Francisco Chronicle, Judge Dana Marks with the National Association of Immigration Judges, and Ian Gordon with Mother Jones. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you.
At the top of the show, we talked with Darrell Steinberg about immigration. His name is also being bandied about as a possible appointee to the California Supreme Court. Governor Jerry Brown has made 2 appointments already and has at least 1 more coming. This week, he nominated Stanford law professor Mariano Florentino Cuellar to the state's high court. Known by his nickname, Tino, Cuellar is a well-respected academic but has no judicial experience. Scott Shafer joins me now to talk about the governor's recent judicial appointees. Hi, Scott.
Hi, Thuy.
Well, the governor's nomination of Tino Cuellar to the Supreme Court is remarkable for a number of reasons, and including the fact that immigration is in the news this week.
Absolutely. It's an appointment that's full of both symbolism and substance. The symbolism, we've had no Latino on the Supreme Court for several years. He is not only Latino, but he is born in Mexico. He's an immigrant. He walked across the border as a kid to come to school in Texas. His family moved to Imperial County. He went to Harvard, Yale, got his doctorate at Stanford, where he now teaches. And so with all these issues in the news and in front of the courts, it is full of symbolism and very significant.
And he's young, and he's married to another judge, Lucy Koh. They're sort of a legal power couple.
Right. She's on the First District and has presided over big cases involving Samsung and Apple, patent cases, that sort of thing. He is young, as is Goodwin Liu, who was also appointed by Governor Brown, the former Cal law professor. So he'll be around for a while, and it certainly is going to add luster, I think, to the court.
Both Cuellar and Liu are in their early 40s. Neither one has had experience on the bench. What's the significance of that?
Well, it's interesting because ordinarily governors and presidents tend to pick appeals court justices and then elevate them up to the Supreme Court. And Jerry Brown clearly has a different way of looking at the court. I was talking with Santa Clara law professor Gerald Ullman today, and he pointed out that appeals court judges tend to be a little more conservative. They tend to confirm 85–90% of the cases that come before them. Law professors are different. They look at the big picture. They think outside the box. They may be more questioning the status quo. And so it makes for perhaps a more interesting member of the California Supreme Court.
And there's one more opening down the pipeline, one more appointment to replace Joyce Kennard. What are Darrell Steinberg's chances of becoming nominated?
Well, as you said, his name's been kicked around. I believe he'd like to be on the court. Here's the problem for him, although Governor Brown knows him, probably respects him. There is no African American on the court either. And frankly, there's no Southern California members of the Supreme Court. And so my guess is that the governor will look first to an African American, someone like Martin Jenkins, who is on the appeals court here in San Francisco, or someone from Los Angeles, someone down south to add some geographic diversity. So I think, and also I would be just guessing, I wonder if he would appoint a third person with no judicial experience. Maybe not.
The governor has also made a number of appointments to the lower courts. Is there a theme that's emerging based on what you're seeing there and also his recent appointments to the state Supreme Court?
Yeah, sure. The governor likes firsts. He's appointed the first Latina judge in Riverside, the first openly gay judge on the appeals court, the first openly lesbian judge just a couple of weeks ago, the first woman judge, the first Hmong judge. So firsts is a big theme for him. He's also, he thinks outside the box. He's appointed a lot of public defenders, defense attorneys, public interest lawyers. Most governors in the past have really stacked the courts with prosecutors and district attorneys. So the governor is really diversifying the court, not only in terms of race and gender, but also in terms of experience. And so that's likely to play out in the kinds of decisions we see.
So just real quickly, what kind of impact do you think it'll have in the long term?
Well, in the short term, I think it gives the public more confidence in the courts because they look like like California does. In the long term, we'll see. I think, the Supreme Court is the final say. And so as a more liberal majority with his next appointment kicks in, you may see the impact of those kinds of decisions in the future.
And the nation will be watching because it is arguably one of the most influential state courts in the country.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, Scott, thank you. Well, researchers from the California Academy of Sciences in San Francisco recently returned from another expedition to the Verde Island Passage in the Philippines. It's a place they call the Center of Marine Biodiversity. More unique marine species live in that spot than anywhere else in the ocean. And now some of their new discoveries are on display in the Steinhardt Aquarium. We begin our story where the journey started in the Philippines. The dive gear is prepped, and a crew from the California Academy of Sciences sets out to explore a place never before seen by human eyes.
The ocean has a lot of space that's been unexplored, but this is one of the most unexplored spaces.
Bart Shepard is the director of the Steinhardt Aquarium in San Francisco and was recently part of a team of specially trained scientists studying an area of the ocean usually out of reach. They call it the twilight zone.
Well, the mesophotic area where we've been doing exploring is in the range of, say, 250 to 500 feet deep.
And that's an area that not a lot of people have bothered to explore.
No, it's very true. And that's simply because you can't reach it with normal scuba diving equipment, with the typical scuba diving equipment used by recreational divers. And if you're going to go through the expense of getting a sub or an ROV, you're going really deep. You're not exploring these sort of in-between areas. So the twilight zone, the mesophotic reefs, have remained unexplored now for many, many years.
They call it the twilight zone both because it's where sunlight begins to dissipate and it remains shrouded in mystery. More people have been to the moon than have dived on these reefs. And what scientists are learning is this area is teeming with life. It's been estimated that the researchers are discovering up to 10 new species per hour in the twilight zone. The divers' voices are changed by the helium gas mix they inhale through their closed-circuit rebreather systems. This technology allows them to stay underwater for more than 5 hours, allowing them to go deeper and work longer. Through a special collection permit from the Philippine government, some of the newfound species were brought back alive to California for further study. They're now housed at the Steinhardt Aquarium. Where are we right now?
Well, we're behind the scenes in the aquarium right now. So the guests, the public, are right on the other side of this wall. And this tank here is a tank that houses many of the corals that we brought back from the Philippines on our most recent trip.
Oh, wonderful, such as?
So there's a lot of deep water corals in here, some hard corals and some black coral that we brought back. I collected and some of my colleagues collected at about 250 to 400 feet deep in the Philippines. This is our aquarium holding room. So this is a brand new room we actually just built. Perfect time for us to bring back animals from the Philippines.
How many species did you store in here?
About 16 different species, about 25, 30 fish that were in here that were held for about 30 days in a quarantine situation. That's just to make sure that we protect our existing collection, that we don't allow animals that are being brought into the building to introduce pests or diseases or parasites that would impact our living collections.
And do you have some species that you're still holding here?
We do. We have a number of things that are part of ongoing research projects. So if you look down in here in these two containers, you'll see some small octopus that are in there. Those are called coconut octopus. We collected those in the Philippines, and they've been part of an ongoing research project that we've been working on for a few years. We were the first aquarium ever to display those, so we perfected the collection and the transport techniques in order to get them all back with 100% survival. We are very interested in cephalopods, the octopus and their relatives, and have done a lot of work with those in recent years.
And now, many of the new species of fish, coral, and other invertebrates are also on display. Aquarium visitors are treated to a unique view of our mysterious ocean planet.
So some of the species are actually displayed here in the public
No,
area.
absolutely, a lot of them now. And this is a tank that we call Deep Reef. And this tank houses some of the animals that we collected in the mesophotic reefs, or the twilight zone of the Philippines.
So what are we looking at?
Yeah, well, there's a number of species of fish in here that we call anthias, or fairy basslets. They're a personal favorite of mine, really gorgeous fish, really bright colored. And there's 3 individuals of a kind of anthias in there. And there's also a little, what's called a wrasse. And that's a whole family of fish, very diverse family of fish. And there's one in here that I collected myself, almost 300 feet.
And tell me what we're looking at here.
So these bright orange fish that you see, they're called flasher wrasses. And the male is the bigger, more colorful one right there. And they call him flasher wrasses because he has really gorgeous colors and really big fins, but he doesn't show them off. He comes up and then all of a sudden, he kind of like gives you a quick peek, and then he puts them away. And that's part of their social structure and the communication that they have between each other, between individuals, males and females, males and other males. So this is the Philippine Coral Reef. This is one of our centerpiece exhibits. It's the largest and deepest indoor coral reef in the world. We've been developing this now for 7 years, 8 years. We modeled this after 2 or 3 different dive sites that we regularly visit when we go to the Philippines. When you look into this tank, what you're seeing is close to 2,000 individual fish in here, representing more than 100 species. And that's pretty impressive for an aquarium. However, it's probably 1/5 of the diversity that we see when we're in the Philippines.
Why is this work so important to you?
I'm fairly confident that unless we radically change things, that in my lifetime we'll see, a much greater degradation of coral reefs, and that, that all of that could be lost. So I want to help sustain that. I want to explore that, and I want to explain that, show that to the people of the earth. Come here to the Academy to see these beautiful animals that exist no place else on the planet.
Pretty amazing, isn't it, to be looking at fish that were completely unknown to the world just a month ago. And that is it for us tonight. For all of KQED's news coverage, please go to kqednews.org. I'm Thuy Vu. Have a good night.